Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am your host, Beth Barany, award-winning novelist and creativity coach for writers. Today, I have with me Bonnie Johnston. She is a writing mentor and an award-winning author with a passion for teaching fiction writers how to increase the emotional impact of their stories to turn readers into fans. And today, Bonnie and I are going to talk about scene openings specifically. And Bonnie is going to share with us what works and what doesn't in 3 scene openings. Welcome, Bonnie.
Thank you, Beth. It's great to be here. I've got 3 scene openings lined up. One that I think is really amazing, one that I think is just okay, and one that I think really fails in terms of like drawing a reader into a scene. I do want to say that all 3 of these are they're middle scenes. They're not the opening of a story, because the first scene of a story has some extra work to do to accomplish certain things, to really pull the reader in and introduce the characters and the world. Whereas the scenes in the middle of your book don't often get as much attention in terms of how you open them. And in fact, it can be really easy to have the scenes in the middle of your book be just like, later that night, or starting with some other really unengaging transition. And the downside of that is that you've got readers who pick up your book and they're excited about it, but then they put it down, and then a week later they come back and open it up. And if they're opening it up to a scene that's not very engaging, they might just put it back down again. Like, you want to have all the openings of the scenes in the middle of your book be so exciting that if somebody picks it up in the bookstore and they like open it to the middle and start reading a scene, they're so drawn into it that they're like, oh, I have to go back to chapter 1 and find out how this started. So that's really what we're going to be working on.
Wonderful.
And I'm going to, cool. So I'm going to share my screen. I've got some slides just so that you guys can see the scene openings as we're talking about them. Okay. So I'm just going to read this first one to you, and then we're going to talk about it. Ashdan waited for me in the center of the sparring space. He had shooed the children to the sides. They watched as I approached. Excuse me. I had the screen covering up. I'm so sorry. Do you think we could cut that and just start again with that
Sure.
slide?
Yeah, go ahead. Start again.
Okay. So for the first one, Ashdan waited for me in the center of the sparring space. He had shooed the children to the sides. They watched as I approached, tree green, solemn-faced sprites with the skill to kill a body with their bare hands. Some of the adults, maybe their parents, stood behind them. They watched too, just as serious and silent. Nico veered to the side to stand by his mother and the cast mother, who stood like a piece of art or an animal breathing in his surroundings. So one of the things I noticed about this when I first read it, this is an excerpt from a book called War Child by Karen Loichi. The very second word in the sentence, the first sentence of this, is waited. And that sets the emotional tone for this entire scene opening. There's a sense of suspense and people holding still. There's images of stillness in here. Ashdan is waiting in the center of the sparring space. The children are sitting there waiting. The adults are standing behind them waiting. Nico stands off to one side to stand by his mother and the cast mother, who stood like a piece of art. There's all these images of stillness that just give you this very focused picture of everybody waiting to see what's going to happen. And that anticipation just builds as you move from the first sentence to the last sentence of this opening. So that's the thing I really liked about it. It was very coherent. It gives you one emotion to focus on, and they're delivering that emotion as the camera is panning through the scene. We're seeing Ashdan, then we see the children, then we see the parents, then we see Nico, then we see the cast mother. So it's very visual too. We're getting this camera view of, we're moving around the room so that we see everybody who's here without it being really distracting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's powerful. And I'm curious. I want to know what is going to happen next. So it works that way as well as a hook.
Yes, absolutely. Even if you know what happened before in the story, once you get to this scene, you're kind of holding your breath, waiting to see what Ashdan is going to do to her. Okay, so moving on to the second scene opening. I'm going to protect for this one and the next one. I'm not going to reveal the author's names to protect anybody's feelings here. The posse had been out for 4 hours before they found what they were looking for. A new campsite recently abandoned. Glowing coals remained in a fire pit circle with stones. The fire had been doused with water, suggesting the outlaws had left in a hurry. Unfortunately, they'd been thorough about covering their tracks. James stayed on his horse, letting his men dismount to check for more signs of where their quarry had gone. His leg throbbed, and at times he felt like passing out. Cold sweat beaded on his brow. Nothing gave away the identity of those who had camped there. And I thought this is an okay scene opening. It starts by orienting us visually, telling us where we are, how long it's been since the last scene ended. We have this nice image of a campfire, glowing coals, a fire pit that's been doused with water. So we're seeing what's happening here, but there's not a lot of emotion to engage with. It's just kind of a very dry, bloodless summary of what the character is seeing, and we don't know who's seeing it. We don't know whose point of view we're in. We don't get the point of view character until the second paragraph, where James stayed on his horse. And that's where all the interesting stuff happens. We learn that he's in pain, he's been injured. And if you've read this story, you'll know that he was injured before, so that's not a surprise to the reader, but it introduces a question of now these 4 hours have passed, how much worse is his injury and how is it affecting him, and like how much longer is he going to be able to do this? So that's actually where the opening gets interesting. And I would actually have started with James being in pain and being disappointed when he sees the campsite, and then give us the description of the campsite so that we're already engaged in a person, and we understand what the meaning of the campsite is. Like, why is it important? And how does he feel about the fact that it's been doused with water? So this wasn't a bad scene opening, but it's kind of blah until the second paragraph, and it doesn't really engage you. And it could have been like a lot more exciting if we had started with James and his pain and his disappointment, and then we saw why.
I agree with you. I really feel that James is who we really care about, and to put that first.
Okay, so moving on to the third example. Someone was tapping on Miranda's bedroom window. She bolted upright, startled. Her heart pounded and she gasped. Her alarm clock said it wasn't even 6 yet. Who would? She groaned. The only day she could afford to sleep in, someone had to wake her up. Maybe it was her brother. She raced to the window. It wasn't her brother, it was Becca. Becca looked over her shoulder. Then she gestured for Miranda to open the window. So this is really, this scene opening really doesn't work for me. And the main reason is that there isn't any sort of context that pulls together a consistent emotion throughout this opening. Like, someone's tapping on the window, that's like not an emergency sort of situation. But the author was really reaching for an emotion, and that's good. They were trying to start with a really strong emotion, but and Miranda is bolting upright and her heart is pounding and she's gasping, but nothing has really happened to make it seem like she's in danger. So it feels melodramatic. It feels like she's overreacting. And then she switches to irritation, like she could have slept in, she groans, maybe it was her brother. We have no idea why she thought it was her brother. And again, that lack of context really makes that hard to interpret. It's like, why would she care if it's her brother waking her up versus someone else? Does she think her brother's in trouble? We have no idea. But then she races to the window. And again, I think the author was really reaching for a strong emotion, but there's no reason for us to think that she needs to race. Why doesn't she just stumble to the window? Like, she just woke up, right? And so she's reacting in a way that almost feels, it feels like an overreaction. And then she discovered it isn't her brother. We see it's Becca. We don't know who Becca is. We don't know why Becca is there. We don't know how she feels about Becca. And we just see that Becca is looking over her shoulder and gesturing for Miranda to open the window. So just in terms of drawing me in as a reader, this completely fails. I don't know why I'm supposed to care about the tapping at the window. I don't know what it means if it's the brother versus it being Miranda. I don't know how she feels about Miranda. So the author was really trying hard to make this emotional, but she didn't do it in a way that would make me feel like I understood why she was being so emotional. And so because I don't know why, I'm not drawn into it.
Great. Thank you for that. Yeah, I like what you said, how there's no consistent emotion and she jumps all over the place. I know that's been one of my early writer problems when I was beginning.
Oh, I totally did that too in my first.
I see that a lot. Yeah. Great. So thanks so much for sharing with us a good example, a mediocre example, and a bad example, all of scene openings. And do you want to come back on camera and tell us real briefly the purpose of a scene opening, so then I can tell everyone why we have made this little video for them?
Sure.
Yeah. So the reason we're doing this little video today is to share with you all this upcoming webinar we have on, the title is 10 Power Techniques for Starting Your Scenes. And can you give us in a snapshot, why are scene openings so important?
Scene openings are so important because they are capturing the reader who's coming off of the scene ending of the last scene. They pull the reader in, they keep the reader reading. You have the middle of every scene is something that moves your story forward. The beginning of every scene is something that captures the reader from the last scene, and then the ending of each scene pushes the reader into the opening of the next scene. So you're basically creating this chain of momentum. You grab the reader, you give them this conflict that they get engaged in. You give them an ending that makes them go, oh no, I have to read the next one. And then the scene opening in the next one kind of catches the reader and kind of passes them along through the story. And then the ending of that scene pushes them to the next one. So you're really trying to keep the reader engaged in this journey the entire time. And if you fumble and you don't catch the reader from the last scene, that's the point where they stop, they put the book down, they forget about it, they never come back, or they pick it up later and they were like, well, I thought I was enjoying the story, but this part is kind of boring, so they start skimming. So scene openings are one of your tools for basically keeping readers turning pages.
Fabulous. I love that football or ball metaphor. It's perfect. It's so great. So everyone, if you enjoyed our peek inside of what makes for good scene openings, then you're invited to join us in our upcoming webinar. Again, the title is 10 Power Techniques for Starting Your Scenes. I'll be hosting, and Bonnie Johnston will be our guest instructor for this webinar we have coming up. So what do great scene openings have in common? That's what Bonnie will cover. How can you be confident that the first sentence or two of your scene will hook your readers and reel them in? As we saw in the examples, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. So you will learn how to hook your reader and reel them in. So Bonnie will cover for us the 4-part structure of a scene and how the other 3 parts unfold from the opening. She will also cover how to know if you started your scene in the right place. Really important. And lastly, 10 powerful scene starting techniques that will grab your reader's attention and draw them into the scene action. So you're invited. I'm very excited to have Bonnie teach us all these wonderful techniques for scene openings. And I look forward to seeing you all there. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Bonnie.
Take care. I can hardly wait.